I'm Tom Rowland, and this is the Tom Rowland Podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, referee Dan Mugliata has called a stop to this contest at 21 seconds of the very first round, declaring the winner by knockout, Gregor the Gift Gillespie.
I'm here with the winner, Gregor Gillespie, and wow, what a fight. Fantastic performance. I mean, that is about as flawless as you get, and to do it here in Buffalo, New York. Give us your thoughts on how that felt.
I love this place. This is my home. Rochester, Buffalo, Edinburgh, this whole snow belt. I love this place. You guys, I'm so glad everyone can make it out here and see this fight happen. We've been working a ton on my striking, and boy, it showed off tonight.
That was Gregor Gillespie. He's a wrestler who's transitioned to MMA, actually to the UFC. He's not just a wrestler. Gregor is a 2-time high school state champion, a 4-time Division I All-American, and an NCAA national champion. So I'm a wrestler, or a former wrestler, and my kids were wrestlers, and I'm a wrestling fan. I've been a wrestler, a wrestling coach, and a wrestling parent, and I'm always a fan of the wrestlers in the UFC. So the fact that Gregor Gillespie is in the UFC is not necessarily what caught my attention. He's 12-0, and he's getting a lot of people's attention, but this is what caught my attention.
And I'm the best fisherman in MMA as well. Just so you guys know, I'm going fishing all day, all week. You guys
He threw down the flag.
follow me on Instagram. You'll see some awesome fishing this week.
Gregor Gillespie, ladies and gentlemen.
It turns out that Gregor is as obsessed with fishing as he is with wrestling and fighting. In fact, he goes by the hashtag best fisherman in MMA, and he gets straight to this fact on multiple interviews.
Best fisherman in MMA. And I'm the best fisherman in MMA as well.
Oh, don't forget, I'm the best fisherman in MMA.
While Gregor has no problem claiming that he is the best fisherman in MMA, he remains very humble with his career as a fighter. When most fighters will use a win to call out an opponent in the post-fight interview while he's in the ring.
If you want me to call someone out and jump through hoops for you guys, I'm probably not going to be that guy. Go find someone else.
However, backstage, Gregor did finally call someone out.
I'll call one person out.
Go ahead.
Chad Mendes, if he wants to have a fish off. Or, I Chad Mendes is an amazing fighter. Obviously, I'm not going to fight him. Different weight class. I'll do a fish off with him. Or maybe Cowboy. I'll fish with Cowboy.
The reference to fishing in multiple interviews caught my attention with Gregor, so I followed Gregor the Gift on Instagram, and sure enough, it was full of fishing pictures. So I direct messaged him, and by the next day, we had this podcast set up. And I really, really enjoyed talking to Gregor. He's in the middle of his training. He was on a drive and took the opportunity to do this interview by phone while he was in the car. I love my conversation with him, and I think that you will too. It's an interesting path to a fishing obsession. So now, here's the conversation with my new friend, Gregor Gillespie. So, Gregor, what are you up to, man?
I'm actually on the road back home right now to where I grew up, which is upstate New York, up near Rochester. So there's a couple birthdays this week. I am November 13th. My sister's November 9th, and my brother's November 15th. So we're doing a little bit of celebrating.
All right. That's great.
Yeah.
What will you guys do when you're celebrating your birthdays?
Well, I mean, I'm going to fish. I'm going to try to get some people to come fish with me, but we'll see what happens there. You know, my brother's not a huge fisherman. I love to fish, obviously, but we'll see who'll tag along. But I think they're doing some sort of party on Saturday for all of us. So
yeah. So what kind of fishing do you do up there?
Typically, I mean, we're right on Lake Ontario. So, during the summer months when it's a little warmer, we get some good salmon fishing in, we get some good trout fishing in. But my personal favorite is muskie fishing.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And do you also have pike?
Yeah, I love pike. Obviously, pike are a little more abundant and a little easier to catch, so they're not as gratifying when you do catch them.
Yeah. So have you, did you grow up fishing?
Yeah, I fished a lot when I was younger. My dad took us out. My dad is a big canoe guy. He builds canoe paddles for a living. And he used to take us out in a canoe a lot and, local lakes. And we got a lot of fishing when I was really young. In my high school and college years, I focused a little more on wrestling and partying than I did fishing.
Well, I was gonna ask you that. That was something that I was very interested in. As a former wrestler myself, I certainly didn't make it anywhere near the level that you did. But I know that, with the camps in the summer and everything that you're doing throughout the year, it doesn't leave a lot of time. And that's when I was kind of interested in how you became so interested in fishing. So your dad was an outdoorsman and building the canoe paddles. I guess he was getting you out often, and that's where the fishing started.
Yeah, I would say, some of my younger memories are when he used to take us up to the Adirondacks, which is, I think the best scenery in New York. And he would take us up there, and he actually would toss us in the back of the canoe when we were real little. And I remember going to Saranac Lake and literally trolling a spinnerbait off of the side of a canoe and catching pike when I was probably 9 or 10 years old. But yeah, again, during my college years, though, I kind of lost interest just due to other activities and obligations. But what got me back into fishing was actually 2 years ago, or maybe 3 years ago now. I went and visited a buddy who was actually a sponsor for Edinburgh Wrestling. His name's Matt Lamoureux, and, big fisherman, big hunter. And he said, I want to get you a muskie. And I said, okay, I've heard the tales about muskie. I've grown up, hearing about them and just, they're the fish of 10,000 casts. You're not going to get me a muskie in one day. He goes, I'll get you one in 1 hour. We got two muskie in that first hour. And then I was hooked. And I just previous to that, I bought a small little 14-foot aluminum Lund for, a couple grand. And we were tinkering around with that. And then it got really serious after that muskie.
Yeah. So what was he doing? What was he doing so differently that you could go from a fish of 10,000 casts to two fish in an hour?
Okay, so Matt Lamoureux knows, and this is insane to even think about now that I look back at it. Edinburgh Lake is a small lake in literally the town of Edinburgh. And I had no idea, but they stocked that lake with muskie. Matt Lamoureux has lived there, 20 or 30 years now. And he actually was a wrestler at Edinburgh as well. He basically knows that lake inside and out, and he was running. They've got, the muskie baits, and everyone's got their own personal favorites, but some guys run riggers, some guys run them right off the side of the boat, some guys run them, however your setup is. But he just has his system. He's like, listen, if you run this for enough time, you're going to get a couple during the day here at Edinburgh Lake, and he knows the spots on the lake to go. And, he's got the whole shebang set up, and he got me two of them in 1 hour.
Wow. That's incredible. I've only been muskie fishing once. I've been pike fishing a number of times. I went muskie fishing one time, and it was, I guess I didn't make enough casts because we didn't get
Were you trolling or casting?
We were casting.
Yeah, that's a lot tougher. When you troll, obviously, you're a fisherman. When you troll, you cover a lot more ground. And, then when you find a spot where they're hitting or a depth that they're hitting, then you maybe cast there,
Mm-hmm.
But when you go out and you think you found a spot, you find them on the sonar, but it's like, man, you kind of got to figure out where they're biting, you know?
Yeah. So. Well, and so when you go out there and you're in, you have this successful trip, what does that do? At this point in your life, you're at what stage in your wrestling or fighting career is this that you fall in love with fishing?
Okay, so here, I'll give you a little more timeline on this. So up until that point, I say it would be 2000, it was my third fight was the first time that right after my third fight, I took a trip to the St. Lawrence and I chartered a boat and I paid for a charter, obviously. I brought my brother and my friend Scott Witt with me. And it was, I guess it would be 2014, September of 2014. We took a trip to the St. Lawrence. And we sat on a boat trolling, and with this guy must have been 100 years old. And he was not very talkative, not very enthusiastic. And we sat on the back of his boat looking at 4 rods on downriggers going all over the St. Lawrence for 8 hours and not even a follow. It was a very discouraging trip. You're in a good mood and your spirits are high the first 2 hours. The next 6 hours when you're not, and the guy put all the poles out and put them on the planers and the riggers, and we didn't touch a pole for 8 hours, literally. And that was discouraging. But I said, all right, well, that was $1,000 trip. 4 of those you can buy. We bought that little Lund, I think 2 or 3 weeks later for $4,000. And I mean, that was 4 trips, so we've gotten way more out of that little Lund. And I've upgraded since then, but in boat wise, but that was in September 2014. And then, we fished on and off, kind of just tinkering around and not anything very serious. And then it was 2016 when I took that trip with Matt Lamoureux in Edinburgh, and he got the 2 muskie in 1 hour. But let me think, that was September or early October. So that was after my first UFC fight. I like to go back and visit my coaches and my friends that still live in Edinburgh whenever I can. I don't have a ton of time, obviously, to make an 8-hour trip, but I went after my first UFC fight. So it was my first victory in the UFC, September or early October 2016. And then ever since then, it's been pedal to the floor, man.
Yeah. And so did fishing have any impact on the rest of your life and the fighting and any sort of a way that it refocused you, or did it have any impact on you? I mean, it must have for you to get so into it.
Yeah, when people ask me that, I actually have a very specific answer, and it's always the same. And I would say, I'm not sure it refocused me. I'm not sure it was something that, when you fish hard, and this, when you fish hard, it's not always relaxing. It's,
no,
you're running and gunning. And I wouldn't say it was, hey, this is my kick my feet up and have a drink in my hand sort of fishing trip. But what it does for me is it breaks up the monotony of my very regimented lifestyle. And I am a guy that does everything extreme. I am a guy that needs a structured, regimented lifestyle. And that's why I'm so good at wrestling and fighting. And it almost got to the point where I was feeling like I was in like serving out a prison term or a prison sentence. And it sounds funny and almost like crazy to say that, but that's really how I felt. I felt like, man, it could be Sunday, it could be Tuesday. Every day is the exact same thing. And weekends didn't really mean much. I don't drink, so it's not like I go out on the weekends or anything like that. So it broke up the monotony. It gives me something to look forward to at the end of every week. So I hold off fishing during the week. I don't fish until Saturday and Sunday. And those are the 2 days I allow myself to do it. That's my weekend. I finally have a weekend. So it gave me something to look forward to.
And are you training? I know that your training will probably change a little bit as you're preparing for a fight or something, but are you training just 5 days a week, or on those weekend days, are you training as well when you're fishing?
Awesome. I also train on those. So like tomorrow when I go up and I fish upstate, I will be getting up at probably 6:30 or 7, and I'll do a workout. I'll go out and fish. When it gets dark, we come back in, and obviously it's getting dark a little earlier now. I come back in and I do another workout before dinner. So, yeah. And my training really doesn't change a whole lot out of fight camp or during fight camp. That for me is kind of a weird term because the only thing that changes is I do a little more sparring, but the number of workouts and the intensity of the workouts is relatively the same year round.
Yeah. And so are you, in order to break up this monotony and to learn more about fishing, are you reading about, and trying to get better also? Does that help you, or are you so wiped out after the end of the training that you're just waiting for the weekend?
So when you say, reading or watching or learning, you meant about fishing,
yeah,
right?
Of course.
Yeah, of course. I'll put it this way. I actually, the last couple of days when I'm doing my morning cardio session, I'm on a treadmill or an elliptical or stepper or whatever it is that day. I actually was watching a bunch of the Saltwater Experience shows.
Oh, yeah.
On YouTube. So, yeah. I like to do that. It's like a lot of guys like to watch fights or, some sort of, they watch an old opponent or a new opponent or, fight stuff. I'd rather watch fishing. And, so I'm constantly trying to learn, and I pick people's brains, the muskie guys especially. I got a buddy up there, his name's Zach Baker. He makes the best muskie lures. And I mean, they are, I almost feel bad using them. They're a piece of art. So I try to talk to him as much as I can and pick his brain. And, these guys, those muskie guys are really into I'll give you an example. They're into the moon times. So
yeah.
For me, I had no idea what he was talking about, but he runs these tournaments, right? And he'll tell me, hey, if you look at the data here that, I picked up running this tournament, 90% or 85% of the fish were caught at peak moon times. So I was like, geez, man, you really are, you're getting picky, not picky, but detailed on this. It's like, hey, just run a few baits at this depth and this speed, and they're doing moon times. And
yeah, well, a lot of the deer hunters feel the same way. Adam Hayes that does Team 200. He's got this moon guide, and you can adjust it and figure out the peak times. And man, some people absolutely swear by that. As a fishing guide, I used to have people that would call me all the time, and they'd be like, "What are the tides like on this week? And what is the moon like? And what's the best week?" And I would always give them the same answer. I'm like, "Look, man, I don't know. I'm going out there, and I'm going to be out there anyway." And so I really don't know what to tell you. I mean, if you fish hard and the wind's not blowing and you get some nice weather, you're going to catch more fish than on perfect moon when it's, you got a cold front. I'm going out there anyway. So, you can come and we'll try to catch some fish and
that's how I fish. I go out tomorrow. It's probably going to be raining. I didn't even look at the wind, but I'm going out regardless because the lake we're going on tomorrow, it's not a big body of water. I mean, if you troll the perimeter of the lake, you'll do it 20 times in the day. It's in a 6 to 8 hour period. Yeah, it's not very big, but I'm going out regardless. I'm not going to get up at 4 a.m. to get there by 6 for the sunrise. I just go, and if I get there at 9 a.m., I get there at 9 a.m. And we fish until it's dark. So 5 p.m. tomorrow will probably be about how late we can cut it.
So that's cool. It's really cool to see you and all of your post-fight interviews and everything else bringing up fishing so much. I mean, you go straight to it. You go by the hashtag of best fisherman in MMA, and you're right there with Joe Rogan in the ring. And the first thing that you say a few things, a couple of nice things about your opponent, and then it's straight to the fishing. I find it really, really interesting that it's that big a part of your life. In my experience, like when I would have anglers come, and these guys, they look pretty athletic, and they're just so into it. They're as into it as I am. And I always would ask them, I'm like, "Hey man, what's your athletic background?" And 9 times out of 10, the people that were really into fishing were wrestlers of some sort. Right. They wrestled in high school or grammar school or something. And baseball players. And I don't know why, but do you have any thoughts on why wrestlers would be drawn to fishing as much as they are? Because it's uncanny, really. I mean,
this would be my only guess. And again, I don't have any research or data to back this up because I don't know a lot about the other sports and what they're doing in their off time. But I know a lot of the good wrestling schools they're rural. They're not, and there's some exceptions. Obviously, there's in Columbus, Ohio State. So, but if you talk about just the Pennsylvania schools, State College, Pennsylvania, where Penn State is middle of nowhere, Edinburgh, middle of nowhere, Clarion, Bloomsburg, all these schools are in the middle of nowhere. And they're typically, those are at one point were really good wrestling schools. But I think a lot of the downtime, guys making weight so they can't go out to eat and drink and party. So I think a lot of the downtime is fishing or hunting. I know at Edinburgh, a lot of these guys were asking for the first day of hunting season off of practice. And in Pennsylvania, they actually, I think, I don't know if this was some made up day off, but the kids are all off of school the first day of hunting season.
Yeah. Well, I think that's awesome. Obviously, I used to have a deal with my kids that if they brought home straight A's, that I would take them out of school and we would go fishing. And
that's awesome.
And we held to that until they were in high school, until the school was just we've got a lot of people getting straight A's here, and not everybody's pulling their kids out of school. So, but it did work, and that was that was my reward. But the people that I know, wrestling and MMA, that are fishermen, definitely the ones that I know the most. Pat Miletich, he loves to fish. Chad Mendez is great. Yeah, he's got a whole guide service. I'm trying to get him on the podcast too. Hopefully, we can get that worked out. I've talked to him a couple times. I guess he's getting ready for another fight, so his time might be a little limited. But he's got a cool thing going in California, and also Clay Guida. He loves to fish. Tito Ortiz.
Tito, I know. I saw a couple of his on YouTube, man. Those guys are really good at fishing too. Again, I think a lot of that stuff, especially with Tito does a little more saltwater. Now I should probably refine my hashtag and my handle with the best fisherman in MMA. I'm definitely the best freshwater fisherman. I wouldn't have a clue. I've only gone saltwater fishing 2 or 3 times. So, I can't claim that I'm the best there, but I know those guys. Tito's, big saltwater guy. I know I've seen Mendez out in the boat in the ocean and doing some deep sea stuff, but, I wouldn't have the slightest idea where to even start in saltwater.
Yeah, well, we should definitely get you down to the Florida Keys, because I think that anyone that is a fisherman at heart loves the Florida Keys immediately, because there's just so much. I mean, it's lifetimes upon lifetimes upon lifetimes of exploring, and for the most part, most of what we're doing is like the type of fishing that you're talking about. It's very athletic style of fishing.
Right.
Of course, there's other ways that you can fish, but for the most part, fishing in the shallow water on the skiff, you're pulling the boat all day long. It's
Man,
basically
that's cool.
like climbing a rope, and you're seeing the fish before you're casting to them. And then it becomes like hunting, to where you see the fish, you try to sneak up on them, and then make a cast in a way that they can't see it or see you. And then these fish are huge a lot of times. I mean, a bonefish can be kind of small, but it's like one of your lake run steelhead up there, just super strong for pound, and they take off. And of course, we have tarpon, which get 150 pounds, and they're in 2-3 feet of water, and you sneak up on those and just throw either a light spinning rod or a fly to them. You would go nuts. You would absolutely.
No, that's something I'm into. Yeah, that kind of fishing I really like. Here's the thing I don't love about I guess it would be my perception of saltwater fishing is I went up to Alaska a few years back to do a wrestling clinic, and they took us out for halibut, and man, it was really cool, but I'm not super into just putting bait on and dropping it down and letting them eat. And I get it. There's some fish that you have to catch like that. They're just not gonna, you're not gonna throw a meps out and catch a grouper. You got to drop it. I get that, but I just like the more active. I don't love throwing bait on and just dropping it down and waiting for something to eat it. I like what you just talked about, going and spot casting those big fish and running a fly past them or a streamer past them.
Yeah. Do you fly fish too?
I just started fly fishing this past about a year ago, actually, because I guess it was a little less than a year. Long Island, all the fresh water was really cold last year here in Long Island, and the last none of the waterways were water anymore. It was all hard water, and the only body of water in Long Island that was still running was the Connecticut River, and they have a pretty cool thing going on there where you actually reserve a spot. You call ahead, you reserve a spot, and they have 4-hour slots during the day, and you pay like $30, and you go in and you get a little platform on the river, and you can stay on the platform or go into the water if you got your waders. But I started fly fishing, I guess it was 8 or 9 months ago, and I fell in love with it.
Yeah. Well, you will. I mean, just from what I know about you already, you're going to go crazy for it, because it is. I don't know. I got way into fly fishing, and and it's just one of these things that it's just this constant learning process, this constant refinement. Not unlike golf or Olympic weightlifting or martial arts, to where the better you get, the better you realize that you can be, and the more practice, like a Tiger Woods or someone that constantly is changing his stroke and constantly working with coaches. And there's just that opportunity with fly fishing. And then, probably something from watching your dad make the paddles, which I'm sure you did when you were growing up. There is this whole aspect to fly fishing where you're tying your own flies, to where you build your own rods, and then I don't know, it's just it's all consuming. It can be, and it can, especially for like what you're saying about the fishing that you're doing now, that it's kind of a break from the monotony, and that's where I think the fly fishing. I don't know. That's what I found about it, is like, it's hard to, like, you've got your friend that makes the lures and stuff, and you probably got to have a wood shop, or I don't know what he's got to have, but to tie your own flies, you just need a vise and a few little things, and you can come up with these cool flies. And then when you catch a fish on it, it's really
gratifying,
cool.
I bet.
Yeah, it really is. But I kind of think that, like, getting back to the reason why the wrestlers and fighters like fishing so much, I always kind of think of it, especially in the type of fishing that I do, it's really a chess game. And you have all of these, and my friend Scott Walker explains it like every morning he gets up and he thinks of it as a puzzle. And it's like the puzzle was all created, and every morning somebody's dumped it all out on the floor. And so you pick up all these pieces and you lay them out on the table and you start looking for the four corners. And then you get these four corners set up, and that's, the wind and the tide and the maybe you throw in the moon or, whatever other factor you're going to do that. And you start putting this puzzle together. And by the end of the day, you've worked out this pattern of where the fish are, which is not entirely unlike a wrestling match. I mean, I guess you can go in there and on occasion you're going to just completely overpower your opponent. But for the most part, in a tough match, it's like a physical chess match.
It is.
You're thinking a step or two ahead, and then there's all this preparation that goes into it. Not unlike fighting, or I know what you're doing in getting ready for a fight is a huge amount of preparation, months, a year ahead of time, and then I noticed that you have some interesting. To say the least, interesting rituals before the fight, which is making weight 2 weeks before.
Yeah.
And then doing it again.
Run. Yeah.
Is that,
yeah.
Did you do that when you were wrestling?
I didn't. It was just I was kind of trying to mimic a wrestling season because, as and anyone else who's wrestled, they know that you make weight throughout the season. So there might be 20 weigh-ins, and typically the first one's the worst, and you feel the worst when you do it. You don't recover as fast when you put the stuff back into your body that you've, run out of it. So really what it was kind of trying to mimic that first bad weight cut and get that one out of the way. So on the second and third time when I do it, my body's actually had practice at replenishing and rebuilding after that weight cut. So it works for me. I know I don't get super heavy. So for me, it's not a huge deal to make it 2 or 3 times before the fight.
What do you walk around? What do you walk around at?
About 170.
Okay. So you're 170, you're fighting 155.
Yeah, but we get a pound. So it's 156 because non-title fights, it's always +1. So it's 156. But, for me, it works. I wouldn't say that everyone would feel the same. I think some guys are so big that it would probably hurt them to go down a couple times. But for me, it works. And I think that's what you need to find when you're fighting. You need to find what works exactly for you. So some guys won't be able to drink Pedialyte right after. Like I personally won't drink Pedialyte. I'll drink half water, half Gatorade. I get a little bloated if I drink Pedialyte because it's so full of those electrolytes and sodium. So, some guys swear by it, but for me, it doesn't work as well. And I think that's the secret of being super successful is finding out exactly what makes you tick and what you run best on.
Mm-hmm. And I also, in that same article that I read, it was talking about you making weight 2 weeks ahead of time, but it also said that you decide purposefully not to fish 3 weeks before the fight. Is that true?
Yeah. So what happens is at 3 weeks out, I cut myself off from fishing, and it almost makes me feel like, all right, it puts me back in that kind of prison sentence lifestyle where I'm like, this is go time. Now it's getting serious. We know, my body and my head, everything knows that a fight's coming up and it's time to really get locked and loaded. And it almost deprives me a little bit of my fun. And it gives me, I hate to say makes me want to beat the guy even worse because that's so cliche sounding, but it makes me feel like, man, I'm being deprived and robbed of a little bit of pleasure here. So I need to get it out somehow. And it almost channels me a little bit towards beating the guy, more than I wanted to already.
Yeah. I can. That's saying a lot about what fishing has done for your lifestyle. Because before that, we're only talking about a few years ago that you really have taken fishing this much into your life. So before that, how are you channeling this aggression? Or
I don't know. To be honest with you, I couldn't imagine living like that still. I'm not sure I'd still be fighting. And it says a lot. And I know it sounds a little extreme, but I don't know how long I could have gone on like that for, because it is really taxing on you, not having any sort of reprieve from, the grind of, 18, 19 workouts a week sometimes. So I couldn't imagine. I might not be fighting if it weren't for fishing or something else to give me a little bit of, like I said, breaking up the monotony and the superstructure of that lifestyle.
Yeah.
So
So do
Yeah,
you think,
I mean,
in that regard, do you think that fishing has made you a better fighter?
I absolutely do. And obviously it's not a direct correlation, but it has some sort of correlation. I think it makes me take a little bit of time off because I'm the kind of guy who I probably overtrain. Actually, not probably. I definitely overtrain, and it at least makes me not do too many workouts on those days that I'm fishing. Gives me a little break. Again, I mentioned that fishing, I fish hard, and we're running and gunning, so it's not kicking my feet up and tanning in the boat. But I think it definitely makes me take a little bit of time off of working out because when I get bored, even if I've already trained 2 or 3 times that day, I'll go for a run because I'm so bored or I'm lonely in my apartment and I have nothing. I'm done with. I'm sick of watching TV, so I'll go out and run. When I'm fishing, I'm occupied and I can't I can't go for a run or go for an extra bike ride or do an extra lift or whatever the case may be.
And so in the way that you're set up right now, wherever you're training and living and you have your boat, you have access basically at short. I mean, it wouldn't take you. It's not a full day trip to go fishing, right? I mean, like you have some access to some good water.
Okay, so here's what happens. So, and this is, we're obviously doing a lengthy podcast here, so I can explain this whole situation. As long as you want, man. All right, cool. So here's what happens. When I'm in Long Island, which is where I live, technically, I have an apartment down there and I'm there, 85, 90% of the time. Like I mentioned, my parents, my brother, my sister, my whole family lives upstate, which is 6-7 hours away from, the downstate area of Long Island, New York City, that whole area. So I don't have my boat in Long Island. I don't trailer it down here. I leave the boat upstate. So if you see me in my boat on my Instagram, that means I'm upstate New York. So what I do when I'm in Long Island is I always am in my waders. So I'm out and I'm, actively walking around the banks or in the water and hiking to little spots that are kind of remote. Typically those are out a little further east in Long Island. But so yeah, if I'm in Long Island, I'm in my waders. And if I'm upstate, I'm in the boat.
Gotcha.
So,
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And you seem so close to the really good striped bass fishing.
I am.
That's never been of interest. I got a friend.
My buddy Justin and my buddy Ken and my buddy Dylan. They're my saltwater guys, and they like to go out and do that with the surf casting. But I've never done it. I did a little bit of blue fishing, like I mentioned last year. I did like 2 or 3 trips with my buddy Ken.
Yeah.
Actually, it's funny. Ken took me out. I had knee surgery. This is really a pretty cool story. I had knee surgery, and it was in May of 2017. And, it was a big knee surgery. I have a 6 or 7 inch scar on the front of my knee. So I was in a leg immobilizer, which is a brace from your groin to your ankle, and you can't bend your knee. So I was in that, and Ken was like, listen, the Blues are on fire out at Smith's Point or wherever we were going. He's like, you gotta come. I was like, listen, man, I'm not sure I'm gonna be able to even walk. How far? He's like, well, it could be a mile from the parking lot to be. I was like, listen, I can't walk like that. Like, he's like, I'll carry you. He carried me out in a piggyback out to the water. He got me on the Blues. I think in 2 hours, I caught like 12 or 13 of them. And they're pretty, upwards of 10 pounds or higher.
Well, I saw one on your Instagram that was huge. One of the bigger bluefish I've ever seen.
Yeah, that was a big guy. That was with Ken. And Ken took me out there and put me on those fish. And I loved it. The problem is Ken is, he has a full-time job, obviously. And his only days are offered during a week. So I, again, don't fish unless it's the weekend. And so I don't get to fish much with Ken. But he's been trying to get me to do fluke and blackfish. And he's doing triggerfish off a dock a little earlier this year. If I went out with Ken, I'd catch a lot of saltwater fish. I just can't make the times work.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you this from what I know about it, and I'm a stranger to this world, but that striped bass world is full of a bunch of maniacs that are into it as you can possibly imagine. And they are seriously completely obsessed. My friend Jamie Howard, who has been on this podcast, did this 3-year-long, I think it was 3 years. He spent a lot of time doing this movie, and it's called Running the Coast. And you should really check that out. It is, it's so close to you. I mean, you're surrounded by all of this water and this whole culture of these obsessed maniacs out there fishing for these giant striped bass, and they fly fish for them, they surf cast for them. Some people actually wear wetsuits and
Yeah.
get in the water, and they call it squishing, where they're
That's
kind of swimming
amazing.
and they're fishing, and they're just out there in the middle of the night in this freezing cold water. I mean, dude, maniacs. These guys,
Yeah, that's
these
wild.
guys will rival any. I mean, every little nuance of fishing has their extreme end of it, but these guys live on the extreme and that's coming from a pretty extreme fisherman myself.
Sure.
That, I mean, I look at these guys, I'm like, dang, dude, those guys are hardcore. So when you find that, you're gonna go nuts for it. There's no doubt about it.
Well, I get that, because I remember when I was out with Ken last year, and I was out with my buddy Dylan right around the same time, and these guys were blue fishing, but obviously some stripers bite when you're blue fishing, but they were literally running from spot to spot. And I mean, it was like, hey, they've moved up to, from Lido Beach, they moved down to Smith's Point. Everyone hops in the car and just bolts.
Yeah.
And I mean, they have a little network of all their buddies that keeps them in the loop.
Yeah.
And man, was it neat to see how fast these guys will jet from one spot to another, because they just know that fishing isn't hot here. It's down the street. Someone went, over there before, and they said the fishing's on here. You get there, and now it's moved down to another spot down the beach,
Right. And they're moving around like crazy, and they got the whole, and they move around with the tides, and they're moving around with all sorts of different situations, and getting a little piece of information just like you're talking about. And then there's a physical aspect to that fishing as well. I mean, some of those guys are wading out as far as they possibly can and finding a rock to stand on, and they're getting pummeled by waves. And that's where you're going to be like, oh, this is physical. Like if I'm tougher or I can stand here longer, that means I'm going to catch more fish than the rest of these guys. And then you'll never come in. You'll be out there.
That's when I say I'm in, man.
Yeah, I can tell.
Yeah.
I can tell. I actually saw your tattoo that it says 1 or 100.
Yep, 1 or 100.
What
Either
does that
I'm not
mean?
doing it, or I'm, 100% diving in head first. So it's either all or nothing with me. And that doesn't pertain to one aspect of my life. That's my entire personality. And if I decide I'm going to do something, like when I decided I was going to fight, I said, I'm going to see this through the whole way. And if I do this, I'm going to be the best, and I will be fully immersed in this lifestyle. And that's how I am. Otherwise, I just wouldn't do it. I'm not going to half-ass anything.
Yeah. So let's talk about that for a second. You obviously, not everyone is going to understand your wrestling pedigree, but you're 2-time state champion in high school. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then you go to one of the best wrestling colleges in the country, D1, Edinburgh, 4-time All-American, and then you win.
Yep.
And not only that, but if I'm not mistaken, at some point along the line, I watched you wrestle Jordan Burroughs.
Yeah.
Who is, I mean, tell me, or tell the people that are listening who Jordan Burroughs is, because he, I mean, in my opinion, he's one of the world's best.
Yeah, no,
sure.
I mean, he definitely is one of the world's best. He might be one of the best in history, not just this current moment in time. He's something else. He has been the guy that has represented the U.S. since 2011. So that's 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So 8 years in a row now, and that's including 2 Olympic years. So of those 8 years that he's represented the U.S., because only one guy can represent the U.S. for any given country for that specific weight style or weight class. So that weight class in the U.S. has been owned by Jordan Burroughs for the last 8 years. And of those 8, he's won 5 world or Olympic titles. So 3 of those 8 he didn't win. He had 2 bronzes and 5 golds, and I think he didn't place in the 16 Rio Olympics, and that was his only bad tournament. What
about just recently in the world? There was a world. Wasn't there a world championships a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, he took a bronze. He lost to, I believe, the Russian, and it was actually the idea was that Jordan Burroughs would probably meet this guy Chamizo, the Cuban, who actually is now wrestling for Italy. I think he defected to Italy, and it was going to be those 2 in the semifinals or the finals. And Burroughs ended up getting beat by, I believe, the Russian, and then the Russian beat the Italian. And then the Italian and Burroughs, who had actually they'd swapped matches, one guy won and the other guy won over the course of the summer. And that ended up being the bronze medal match, which Burroughs won. So this most recent tournament, he was the third best in the world.
Wow.
Which actually, it sounds so crazy to say this, but a little disappointing considering everyone expected him to win another gold. So I'm sure that, he was probably he felt he probably underperformed. He'd won 5 Olympic or world medals, titles before that.
That comes, you think he's a little bit disappointed when his Instagram handle is all I see is gold?
All I see is gold. He is just something else. I mean, up until a few years ago, he had, I think, only 1 loss in his first 5 years of international competition, which is absolutely mind-boggling.
That is mind-boggling, especially when you know anything about the way that some of these other countries manage their youth programs, like Cuba or I'm sure Russia. I don't know much about the
Cuba
Russian,
but
two.
Yeah.
Cuba. I mean, somebody like Yoel Romero basically brought up in a wrestling training camp.
Yeah.
Going to school and training, and depending on which number, is he number 1 or number 4? Depends on how much you get to eat. I mean, there's a whole
you must have
different
listened
motivation.
To you listened to the Joe Rogan podcast.
I listened to that Joe Rogan podcast, and I was fascinated the whole time.
Man,
I'm just thinking, and wrestling in the United States is a lot of private schools, and and how can you possibly compare the motivation? I mean, this guy is trying to eat. We've got kids over here trying to win a state championship. Just the difference. I was just fascinated with the difference of the motivating factors. And I mean, more so than anything else in that podcast, I was just like, wow.
I know, man. That was such a super cool one to listen to. And I remember, other than they had the translating issue, obviously he doesn't speak great English. So that was the one thing that wasn't like awesome about it, but it didn't really matter because the content was so fascinating.
Right. And especially, especially coming from from somebody that knows even just a little bit about wrestling. I mean, maybe it wasn't as interesting to people that don't know anything about wrestling or how competitive it is or just all of that. But I just was fascinated by that.
I know. And like the thing you mentioned earlier is it's like the cool kid getting to sit at the cool kid table. If you win or you're the best guy in the country at that weight class, you're getting better housing, better food, more meals, more privilege. And it's like, man, no wonder these countries like that are obviously good. The motivating factor there is your livelihood. And, the U.S., it's incredible that they won the Worlds last year and took second this year. It's just insane to think that we could compete with, a country like that, or even, more so is the Russians. The Russians, it's literally insane. That is the national sport in Russia. And if you are a good wrestler, you're famous. I mean, Alexander Karelin is a politician now. Yeah. And, he's the most successful wrestler in history, but he's literally like a high up guy in the government in Russia.
Yeah. Yeah. And high up in more ways than one. The guy's freaking a giant.
Oh my God, what a monster, right?
He's a total monster. So anyway, we got on a little bit of a tangent because Jordan Burroughs is in or around your weight class. And so as you get out of college, and then not to mention that Kyle Dake and David Taylor are probably right there too. So bump up, bump down, and not that,
good luck.
Not that at that level you're not going to be encountering unbelievable competition, whether or not you've heard of these people or not. That leads you to you finish college, and where does that leave you? Are you looking at the UFC as a possibility, or what's the I just had Matt Hughes on, and I was asking him about his motivating factors, and he was like, man, I just went to there was basically a tough man contest, and I went there and won, and it was fun, and I made a little money, and then I just kept going. And so what was your journey like there to, coming from college and obviously now the UFC is a major draw. It's a real way to make a living. There's a career there. So how does that work for you?
Okay, so when I was done competing, my last year of eligibility was '09. That was my last NCAA tournament. I did that. Got done with school. I took a couple years off of doing pretty much anything, partied a little too much, cleaned up my act, and then I wanted to compete again. When I was totally done with my '09 year, I really was done, and I didn't want to compete ever again. I just was so sick of, I loved winning and I loved competing, but just it was such a grind. In college wrestling, there's nothing like it. Having to do school and having to do the weight cut a couple times a week and having to travel all over the country, play catch up when you get back, and you've got the toughest dudes in the country trying to rip your head off every week and even in your own practice room. So I was done. In '09, I said, I'm done. Thank God. I remember saying this to a buddy. I said, my term or my sentence is through. I finished it. I've served my time. I did my time. Like I said, I started partying a little too much and it got a little out of hand, and I ended up cleaning up my act a little bit. When I got to that point, I said, what the hell else am I going to do now? I should probably start competing again. So I started wrestling again. I did 1 year of freestyle wrestling, and that just happened to be the year Jordan Burroughs was coming out of college and won his first world title. So I mean, it was so clear to me that for anyone that doesn't, anyone who's listening who doesn't know wrestling, collegiate style and American style wrestling, there's a lot of top and bottom. So when you take a guy down, you can stay on top of him. When you're on bottom, the objective is to get out. In international style wrestling, which is what you do after college in the Olympic and world level, there's really no top and bottom. It's all, neutral, they call it. So you're on your feet and the objective is to take the guy down or turn the guy as he's taking you down, or, something along those lines. So there's really no top and bottom position. My forte in wrestling was top. So that my best part of my game was taken away from me. Is if I wanted to compete in freestyle. Jordan Burroughs, on the other hand, probably is the best guy ever in the neutral position in history, maybe. So for me to think that I was going to compete with Jordan Burroughs and beat him in his best spot, which was not my best spot, was just, I saw the writing on the wall, and I said, I think it's probably time to try something else. At that point, I'd actually moved to Long Island to coach at Hofstra, and I started tinkering around with some local MMA guys, and they asked me if I could help them, spar for a wrestler that they were fighting. I said, hey, I'm pretty good at this. I'm beating these guys who are actually, either close to or in the UFC, and I have no training. So, if I put a little into this, I think I could be pretty good. That's the short story.
And so what's the first step that you thought you needed help with, like boxing, on your feet, striking, or jiu-jitsu? Like when you're thinking about taking the next step, where does that look like for you?
Yeah, I can only speak for myself because I know striking comes a little more natural to some than others. For me, striking has been the hardest thing to pick up, and I'm definitely getting better at it, and I continue to improve at it because it was such a foreign skill to me. But, obviously wrestling, I had to tie some punches into takedowns, and I had to tie some defensive punches into takedowns. And jiu-jitsu is really just an extension of wrestling, where the objective is to hurt the guy or put him in a spot where he could get hurt so he submits. But boxing is completely different. Typically, wrestlers that are righty put their right leg forward, and if you're righty in boxing, you gotta go left foot. So fortunately for me, I was left leg and right leg when I wrestled, so it was okay, put my left leg forward. But yeah, striking is so different than wrestling and jiu-jitsu that it's definitely been the hardest for me to pick up.
Yeah, and I would think that that's also some pretty hard lessons. You go in there and you start training with some boxers.
Yeah. Well, the hardest thing, in my opinion, was when you think you're just going to run everyone over with takedowns, and then it's a lot different when guys are throwing punches at you, and you can eat a knee pretty quick. And I ate my fair share of those at the beginning. And then the frustration with guys that are not wrestlers, but they're stopping your takedowns because you're not setting them up. You're just diving in because you think you're going to, you're the wrestler, so you should be able to run them over. And my head coach, Keith Trimble, actually, he planted it in my mind pretty quick. Like, listen, man, this is not a wrestling match. You have to set those up or you're going to pay. And not like you're going to lose points. You're going to get hurt. So, he planted it in my mind fairly early that, listen, man, you got to set these takedowns up. You can't just go diving in there. This is not a wrestling match. I don't care what you think. You got to add some punching in, and then you got to throw at them to either shoot, or you got to throw at them to get them to throw back and then shoot. So that's kind of been a really big focus of our training, is the striking to the takedowns, and then get them to throw back so you can shoot under their punches. But that came fairly easy to me. Now, if you're talking just boxing and I go in and box a good boxer, now that is, that's humbling. You know?
Yeah, I would imagine that it would be. Well, this is kind of interesting because it seems like, you were at a place in your career that you had done so much competitive wrestling in order to get to the level that you finally were, 4-time All-American and a champ.
Yep.
I mean, I know what it takes to get there, kind of. That's a tremendous amount of competition. I mean, and practice and weight cuts and all of that. So you're at a point in your career to where you're even calling it like you've served your prison term. And now you're moving into this new world of MMA, which has some familiarity to it. Like there's some things that you're going to really take to and some things that are completely foreign. So how has that been for you has that re-energized you now that you're learning all of these things and then you kind of realize, wow, there's way more to learn? Is that like liberating or re-energizing?
Yeah, I would say that, I'm not sure what the right word or term is for that, but I would explain it like this if I'm going to dumb it down. The room to grow in wrestling for me was like 0.1%. That was the gap I was trying to close. So let's say I was at 99.4% of how good I was ever going to be. To get to 99.5 or 99.6 was going to be, a long, arduous process and not very gratifying because you really don't notice that difference. It's not like you're learning a ton of new skill and, you may not even notice that you've gained that 0.1%.
Right.
Now, whereas fighting, I might make a 5% jump in a year, which is, you could tell the difference then. You're beating guys you weren't beating before.
Yeah.
So that's a lot more gratifying, in my opinion.
Yeah, and then the learning, too. I would imagine, like you go back into wrestling and you're like, every practice you're learning a new move when you're a kid. You're like, oh, look, I can do this and I can do this and I can do this. And everything's super exciting. And now, you're going to jiu-jitsu and you're learning, I just take this one little wrestling move, I change it just a little bit and check this out. I'm submitting this person. Or, wow, I was eating a knee and now I'm doing this one thing slightly different. And I'm not doing that anymore.
Yeah, it's fun to see new skills actually work. That's like when you do hey, I learned this technique in a jiu-jitsu class, and obviously it's not magic. It doesn't work the second you learn it. But over the course of a couple weeks, man, you've taken that skill that you learned and you can see it being effective against guys who are good. And that's very satisfying. That it really is. Yeah.
I always think that and you may feel the same way, but I always think that other activities, whatever they are, like for you, it's fishing, and this is enhancing your fighting because it's giving you it's either giving you a break or it's allowing you to look at things a little bit differently. And in my fishing career, I often look back on wrestling and think, okay, well, there's a lesson learned, and maybe if I apply it over here, then I can work this problem out that I'm having. Or maybe if it's just a long stretch of bad weather, it's like, well, I'm tired, I'm sore. It's no different than wrestling practice. You just go. You just do it.
Yeah.
And in this, like what we're talking about right now, I was had a long career as a Key West guide in a skiff. And then I started having kids. And about that same time, I got a different kind of boat. I got a bay boat, which is a larger boat, has bigger live wells. It has, in the skiff, it's a 16-foot boat. There's no trolling motor.
Right.
We were just poling along, pushing the boat with a push pole, mostly with fly fishing clients. And then I started getting into these tournaments and I started learning about spin fishing and that in the type of fishing that we were doing, spin fishing could be as skilled at spin fishing as you can be with a fly rod. And that was a real eye-opener for me.
Yeah.
And then I got this bay boat that had these bigger live wells in it. So now all of a sudden I'm throwing the cast net and I'm getting pilchards, and this opens up this whole new style of fishing. And it's kind of similar and into kind of what we're talking about you almost being a little bit burned out in the wrestling and then having this other opportunity to have your eyes open, really start learning. That's the same thing that happened to me with the bigger boat and the bay boat. Is all of a sudden I became more excited about fishing than I had ever been before, because all of the stuff that I had learned in the skiff, now I was applying it differently to the same kind of situations, but with different tackle, with different people, with different objective in mind. And it totally was a career shift for me in the bay boat. And it sounds kind of similar. I mean, how can you compare, fishing and fighting in the UFC? But I just kind of do it in that it doesn't really matter what it is. I think that the person that is constantly trying to learn is able to take whatever activity it is, whether you're into, I don't know, whatever, yoga, and somehow apply that to your business. And it sounds like that's kind of what you did, and it sounds similar to the boat. When you were telling me about that, I was just thinking, man, that sounds like how I felt with a bay boat.
Yeah. I mean, it's happened to me in fishing too. Like I told you, I haven't, only a couple of years now, I've been very gung-ho fishing, but when you run the same setup and the same program for muskie fishing or pike fishing, whatever it is, over and over and over and over and over again. Yeah. I mean, sometimes you don't catch the fish, but the majority of the time you are catching fish, and it's, it's exciting when you catch fish. But this past year, so I guess it was like middle of 2017, I got a bigger boat, 17.5 foot tracker, deep V, and we put downriggers on it, and it changed my world.
Yeah.
And just a different type of fishing and a new skill. And now you're having to relearn how to fish, and, taking some things from the other form of fishing, but now adding in new skills and a new platform.
Right.
And
that's so similar to like even wrestling or I don't know fighting like I know wrestling, but it's like now you got that downrigger and it's working, and you start catching a couple of fish on it, and then there's this tendency to just stay there. It's like when you learn a new wrestling move, and it's like, oh, okay, well now I'm going to go out and I'm going to throw everybody. That's not appropriate. Or if you try to throw this guy, you're going to end up on your back. It's not, that's his world, right? And I find that with fishing all the time is like, I'll open up this new world, whether that, what you're saying is the downrigger. For me, it might be maybe a new area where I'm finding these fish. And then the tendency is, wow, this worked. So now I'm going to do it every day. It's just like with wrestling. I mean, that's what I'm talking about the applying the different things. It's like if you just went out and tried to take down everybody you're fighting, it's going to work sometimes.
Right.
But you're going to pay for it others.
Yeah, of course.
And so that's where I see that it's just this chess game. It's like sometimes the downrigger is going to be the best way. And then other times you're only going to want to use that part of the day. And in other times it's not going to be effective at all. Yeah. It's I don't know. I find it very interesting. And I kind of think that is one of the reasons that the wrestlers have gravitated so much to MMA. I mean, to MMA, of course, but to fishing.
Of course,
yeah.
I think new is always like adding new skills and adding new anything is always a little more fun. So like this weekend, we're probably going to run riggers. And then I got some planer boards that I really want to try out. I don't know how to use them, but the thought of having to learn how to do that excites me. And like, I don't know how to use a planer board. You'd be crazy because most muskie guys do, but like, I've never really used them. So I got a couple of them at home, and I can't wait to use them this weekend. And this summer I started salmon fishing because it was just too dang hot for the muskie. Mm-hmm. And we went out salmon fishing, and I mean, it was so cool because it was kind of like the unknown. And you're like, hey, is this really going to work? I'm going out to 300 foot of water out in Lake Ontario. I can't see the land anymore. And there's fish out here? Really? And like, then you start catching them and you're like, holy crap, man, this is cool.
Yeah. And and that's just like a whole new world. It is. And now it's like, okay, what would get me so excited is when I would find something that would work in weather conditions that other things won't work anymore. So you get, I don't know what your prevailing wind is up there, but when it shifts the opposite way, that's probably not good. And then all of a sudden you find this one thing, you're like, oh, well, we could go over here and catch smallmouth bass up against this shoreline. Right. It's the lee shoreline. So this weather condition that you used to be, afraid of or upset when it would roll around, now you're like, oh, no, that's the best for this over here. And you've learned this.
Right.
And you continue to progress as a fisherman. You continue to progress in your knowledge of how things are working. And in the Florida Keys, that's what gets so many people so excited about both the Florida Keys and Louisiana, just that there is just this massive, endless area. And then you add on top of that you can just explore it. I mean, and forever. I mean, and there's so many different fish. I mean, we'll fish for over 50 different types of fish. And so on almost every weather condition, there's something that you could do. And,
wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, and it's really fun. Yeah, I definitely want to get you down there because you're
man, I'm in.
You're the kind of guy that would really appreciate it for sure.
Yeah, I would, man, for sure.
So what about your future? Do you have another fight planned?
We're working on that currently. We're just trying to figure out the date that works and the location that works. And obviously, I'm a New York boy. I'd love to fight in New York. I know there's one coming up in the early part of 2019 that I'd really like to be on. So my managers are working on that currently. But as of this second, there's nothing set in stone. So that's where we're at right now. Obviously, I'm training like I have a fight. So I'll be ready if they say, "Hey, this is where you are." Be ready, you know.
Can that happen? Right. I mean, in the world of the UFC, do you have to just basically be on go? Like
no, because you don't have to say yes to a short notice fight. A lot of guys wouldn't, and if I weren't prepared, I would say no as well if they had a short notice opportunity and I wasn't definitely prepared. You know, I try to stay as prepared as I can, barring that there's no injuries or sickness or anything. I don't know. I can't speak for all the other athletes, but I can say that I am, close to being ready most of the time. So if it's, relatively short notice, I'd probably pull it together. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll be watching, and you'll have a whole army of fishermen in your corner.
Cool, man. I love that.
Yeah, no, you definitely will. And we're going to get you some more information on both the striper. I'm going to see if I can get my friend Jamie Howard to send you the movie, and you can watch that.
Yeah, I would love to watch that movie you were talking about.
Yeah, running the coast. That's a really amazing piece of it's like a documentary, and it's in a couple of different formats, and it really goes into they're a migratory fish, and so they're moving, right. And we have a migratory fish in the tarpon, and there becomes a lot of mystique to that because they're here sometimes when they're supposed to be, and then other times when they're supposed to be here, they're not, and kind of like, where are they? Yeah. And so that gives the fish a lot of mystique. Yeah, we'll definitely get you hooked up with that deal, and we'll be watching. The whole fishing world will be watching you. Yeah, you'll all of a sudden be the favorite.
Yes.
The favorite of all the fishing. But I wish you all the best of luck. And if people want to find you and follow you on your awesome Instagram, tell us how to do that.
It is the handle is @Gregor the Gift, and that's spelled GREGOR the Gift.
Okay.
One word.
And do you do any other social media, YouTube?
I mean,
or
I have
else?
Facebook. My Facebook's attached to my Instagram, so it's all the same stuff. You're not going to get anything on one that you won't find on the other. But I don't use Twitter. I just never really got into it. I know I probably should have, but my Instagram is my main platform, and I put all my fishing stuff up there, a lot of my workouts, and anything else that maybe piques my interest, I'll throw on there. But mostly it's fighting and fishing.
That sounds fun. Sounds awesome. Okay, cool, man. Well, I hope you have a great trip on this one with your family. Happy birthday to you and your brothers and sisters, and just have a great weekend. And we'll be watching.
Awesome.
All right, Gregor. Thank you.
All right, it's been fun. Thank you.
See ya.